Hello, my friends. Greg Koukl here on Stand to Reason. And glad that you've joined here the School of Clear Thinking Christianity. I've been saying that for 25 years now on my broadcast, actually 5 years longer than Stand to Reason's history, or 4 years longer, and because that's how long I've been broadcasting. And, I stand behind that. I have a little sticker on my car. You can get it, actually. STR gives them away at events and stuff. It says, Christianity Worth Thinking About, Stand to Reason. It's an emblem. So I am going to recommend 4 things that are, for me, watershed issues for a Christian university or so-called Christian university. And I have to throw that in now because nowadays it's hard to tell. Just because a university has a Christian heritage or background or something like that does not mean that they are Christian in a New Testament sense of the term. Now, I'm not here to, look down my nose at people. You're not really a Christian kind of thing. That's not my point. My point is that this word has a meaning that people make assumptions about when it's attached to the university, and a lot of times those assumptions are not fulfilled in the actual practices of the university. So the parents pay top dollar to send their kids to a private school with the expectation that there's going to be a certain worldview that's advanced when in fact it turns out to be quite the opposite. So I'm going to give you 4 things to be thinking about with regards to any Christian school that you would send your young person to, that you think is going to be a safer environment for them than a secular university. That is, these are my 4 conditions. And the first one has to do with the Bible. And my condition is a commitment to inerrancy or something very, very close. A lot of folks shy away from the word nowadays. Inerrancy, well, what exactly does that mean? It's all kinds of variations. In any event, some very high view of Scripture, something akin to inerrancy if they don't use the word. That is, the Scripture has to be the standard. And that whatever goes against the Scripture properly understood is going against God. That's what I mean. So if you have a Christian school that does not have something like an inerrancy view of the Scriptures they will be teaching, then my personal opinion, don't waste your money. All right, so that's the first thing. And I'm going to move these fairly quickly because I got a lot of people in line here I'd love to talk to today on the phone. So that's the first thing, inerrancy. Here's the second thing. The second thing is the Great Commission. And I am speaking specifically now regarding the cultural ethos towards pluralism or inclusivism. Pluralism or inclusivism. Pluralism is the view that all religions ultimately lead to God on their own merits. Inclusivism is the view that all religions ultimately get to God, but not on their merits, still on the merits of Christ. So Roman Catholicism is inclusivistic. Yes, you need Jesus, but you don't need to believe in Jesus to get the benefits of Jesus. That's inclusivism. And there are a lot of Protestants who believe that as well. What I am suggesting here is that if you want to send your kid to a Christian school, they must be clear on the Great Commission. Jesus is not a first among equals. He is the Lord. And he has sent his followers into the world to make disciples, which entails bringing the gospel message to them so that they can be converted and become disciplined followers of his. Everybody needs this. If you think everybody doesn't, if a school thinks that, well, there are other religions that are just as legitimate and equally ways to God, I don't care how you spin it theologically, whether it's pluralism or inclusivism, you got the Great Commission. And the Great Commission is critical. So the school needs to have, in my view, a high view of Scripture and be committed to the Great Commission. Whether the school is committed itself to fulfilling the Great Commission, to me, is not so critical. But as Christians are affirming the Great Commission as a role of Christians, the church, that all religions are not equally legitimate ways. Only Jesus brings us to the Father. Because indeed, that is what Jesus said himself, incidentally, many, many times, not just John 14, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father but through me. He said that's one notable spot, but there are many other places. He who believes in the Son has life. He who does not believe, the Son of God does not have life, but the wrath of God abides in him. You know, I've got a little booklet with 100 such verses from all over the New Testament. So it wasn't just Jesus himself, but all those who he trained personally to follow after him. They said the same thing. Inerrancy, the Great Commission, Jesus the only way. Here's the third thing. I would be concerned with any school that advanced some form of theistic evolution. I am not an ardent young earther. I think there are different ways of characterizing kind of the creation project. But I think that once you embrace the idea of theistic evolution, that God used the Darwinian model, that the secularists pretty much got it right with regards to the development of life on the planet, but we want to attach God to it in some way, I think you've made a serious mistake. And it is going to be very difficult to, I think, ultimately argue for an historical Adam and an historical fall and original innocence if you hold that view. In fact, I listened to a presentation by Dennis Lemeroux, at ETS, Evangelical Theological Society, in Baltimore in November. And at his presentation, his first slide up was in big, bold letters, there was no Adam. And then he went on to argue that doesn't matter to orthodoxy. Well, I think it does. He's convinced in the Darwinian project, and so he's advancing the idea of theistic evolution. But there was no Adam. Look at, if there was no Adam, then Paul was wrong. And so was Jesus. Now, Lemeroux said, when I asked him a question about this, about original innocence, was there a time of original innocence? He said it's irrelevant. Well, if you think original innocence, the time before the fall when human beings were not fallen, is irrelevant to the project, well, then you could send your kids to Yale or Harvard or, podunk you, as far as I'm concerned, because you've already fallen so far that it really doesn't matter anymore. This is central. And this is my concern with theistic evolution, all right? Here's the final issue, and that is something that's very, very low on the theological pecking order, but has become central for a different reason, and that is homosexuality. What is their view on homosexuality, and especially issues like same-sex marriage and the like? Do they think homosexuality is somehow morally benign, or are they in favor of same-sex marriage? If they are in favor of same-sex marriage and think homosexuality is morally benign, they do not understand the biblical worldview. Period. They don't. Jesus said it best. In the beginning, it hasn't been this way. Make a different point, but he's arguing deductively from the broader principle to a specific application, that is divorce. The broader principle is still in place, and it has other applications. In the beginning, it's not been this way. Male and female, he created them, and the two became one flesh. God made the natural order a certain way, male, female, to be united together. Not living together and hanging out and multiple sex partners and all this other things, no kind of sexual sin, which includes homosexuality. Rather, one man with one woman for life. That's the biblical pattern. And same-sex marriage is a distortion of the natural order. Now, if you don't agree with it, fine. I'm not talking to non-Christians right now. I'm talking about Christian people who are looking to send their kids to a school that they can trust. And I'm saying that if the school has given in on homosexuality, then it tells you something. And you're thinking, wait a minute, Koukl, I thought you said that was low on the pecking order. Yeah, it's low on the pecking order, but it's strategic in this regard. This is where this culture is demanding that we bend towards them. They're demanding it. And it is precisely at this point that the culture is drawing a line and asking us to step across it. That we are going to either show our allegiance to Christ by saying no, or show our allegiance to secular culture who's making us feel bad, and by saying yes, we'll celebrate diversity. And so it's the strategic role that it plays in the bigger picture that's significant. This is the way the rest of the culture is demanding we be faithless to God. And it's at this point then we must say no, precisely for that reason, not because homosexuality is the biggest theological issue, but because it is the watershed issue here. And the issue of faithfulness. This has nothing to do with condescension or hatred or disgust towards homosexual. It has nothing to do with that. Bigotry, intolerance, nothing. It simply has to do with seeing the world the way God sees it. And if you have a school that claims to be a Christian school, yet you then declare things contrary to the way God clearly declares them and made them, you don't need the Bible to see this. I think that's obvious from Jesus' point. From the beginning, it's been male and female. If you're going to go that direction, then I think that your claim to being Christian is illegitimate. Now, you're welcome to do whatever you want. I'm telling parents, don't send your kids there. If you're going to send your kids to a Christian school, you want a school that, 1, 2, 3, 4, has a high view of Scripture, something like inerrancy, believes in the Great Commission, that Jesus is the only way of salvation, and we have to let people know that. No pluralism or inclusivism. That has not given in to theistic evolution, has not accepted the neo-Darwinian synthesis and tried to marry that with their theology. And finally, one who is towing the biblical line on homosexuality, and therefore will not be in favor of same-sex marriage, because this is a distortion of God's purposes. Now, one last observation here, or at least qualification, and that qualification is this. These 4 points have to be more thoroughgoing than just statements in their faith statement. They can't just be in the statement of faith. This is what's got to be actually practiced and taught. I know of Christian schools who have great statements of faith that in the classroom they don't live this out. The parents read it on the website and they think, oh, this is safe, but their kids aren't safe because something else is taught. This has got to be real. It's got to be the commitment of the school. And so therefore, I would look at the statement of faith to begin with, and then I'd ask, when you follow your kids to the U, you want to send them to the Christian U, then you ask lots of questions, particularly on these issues. That is, if you care about your kids having that Christian education. Some of you won't care about that, and I don't mean this in the pejorative. It may be that you think my kids are fine. They're going to be agents of change in that Christian world. We're ready to send them out as disciples. You send them wherever they want. The difficulty is when you send them to a secular school, at least you know what you're up against. And you got your guard up. When you send them to a so-called Christian school, a lot of times you get the same theology and sociology and political correctness you get at a secular school, but it's glossed over it's baptized in some way to make it less obvious. And so then your guard's down and you get nailed. And that's my concern. Inerrancy, Great Commission, no theistic evolution, and biblical with regards to homosexuality. Those are my 4 requirements right now. Maybe in 10 years they'll be different. Let's go to break, and then I'll be back with your calls on Stand to Reason.
Would you like brief, easily digestible answers to some of the challenges you face as a Christian ambassador? Well, that's why we created our Ambassador's Guide series of booklets. Each volume in this series is designed to equip you with the practical tools you need to understand a topic or area of concern confronting Christians today. With these booklets, you'll receive concise and approachable guides to various philosophies like pluralism and postmodernism, world religions such as Islam and Mormonism, even strategies on how to answer the challenges of the new atheists. To order a booklet from the Ambassador's Guide series, visit our online store at str.org or call 800-2-REASON.
All right, friends. Greg Koukl here, one of the good guys, equipping you to think every week on Stand to Reason. 3 full hours for the podcast. regardless of how many hours you get in your live broadcast on the weekends or whenever you catch it, we have 3 full hours that you can get on podcast at iTunes or especially str.org. Best place to go because there's so many other things there that you'll find valuable. And Scott, welcome to the show.
Hey, Greg, how are you?
Good. I'm doing fine.
Good.
I love California too. So I don't know which one's my first favorite state, but I love Wisconsin. It's a beautiful state.
Well, I've lived in both states now, so.
Do you have a preference?
Probably California. Well, I've only really experienced the winter in Wisconsin, so that's.
Well, of course.
Yeah.
California's
I'm
got
ready
great
for it to
weather.
be over.
You're what?
I'm ready for it to be over.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure you are. Well, you guys got a lot more rain this year, or rather snow, more precipitation, I think, than in the past. So that might be good for the water levels. Whereabouts in Wisconsin are you?
Well, I'm actually I live in motels in Wisconsin because I'm an inspector on the pipeline, and so I travel all the way from the northwest corner down toward Chicago, all up and down the pipeline. So
okay, wow.
I'm actually from Pennsylvania. So.
I gotcha. Okay, what's on your mind today, Scott?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you because I've been a fly on the wall for hundreds of hours of your conversations and monologues, and so I thought it was about time to chime in because you've been a great help to me in clarifying thinking and things like that. So I want to qualify myself as a first of all, a great friend of apologetics because my question may sound like I'm not. But I actually helped facilitate a group at my church. We went through the ambassadors-based curriculum and then the tactics book, which led us to a research project we did at our county fair where we asked almost 1,000 people questions about origin, meaning, morality, destiny, and it was a great project, and so it was a great tool to kind of take the pulse of our county and probably one of the easiest ways I've ever experienced in leading conversations toward the gospel.
Yeah, that's great. And once you start with that, and then you have the tactics, it really becomes fairly easy in a certain sense, wouldn't you say?
Oh man, yeah. It was amazing, and you were. I mean, obviously the tactics. It was just extremely instrumental in kind of training us to know how to stay in the driver's seat and not be steamrolled and all that. So it was just fantastic, and we've got a lot of data to compile yet.
Good. But
it was a wonderful experience. Anyway, all that to say, my question is not a caustic one. It's more just curious, and I need some clarity on it. I was reading in 1 Corinthians 2 this morning, and really my question is about the whole chapter, but some key verses there just made me wonder how we can reconcile the field of apologetics with the content of this chapter. Because I guess the verses that I'm pointing to are verse 3. Verse 3 through 5 and 6.
I was with you in weakness and in fear and in much trembling, and my message and my preaching were not in persuasive words of wisdom, but in demonstration of the Spirit and of power, that your faith should not rest on the wisdom of men, but on the power of God. Right. We do speak of wisdom among those who are mature. Wisdom, however, not of this age, nor the rulers of this age, but God's wisdom in a mystery, etc.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. So my question then is just is this kind of a pearls to swine type scenario where we just kind of we let the Spirit lead us in terms of to direct our conversations and to know when it's worth it to actually talk to someone about or to argue or to persuade or to engage in that kind of a way.
Okay, let's see. I think this passage is a little bit tricky. What's curious to me, I just did something that I have a suspicion that you didn't do, but virtually nobody does it who brings this passage up. Okay. And it's something, though, that's really going to be helpful to us, okay? So this is Paul's first epistle to the Corinthians. That is the people in Corinth. Some people have looked at this passage that we've just cited here, and they've drawn some conclusions about the broader task of apologetics. Well, this verse seems to be against apologetics. I'm going to make 3 quick observations for you, and the third one will be the thing that maybe you didn't do, but we'll see, okay, that would be helpful. The first thing is that if this is against apologetics, then we have clear contradictions in the Scripture.
Right.
For example, the word apologia comes from 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 15, where it says, always be ready to make a defense, an apologia. So if Peter says that we should be giving an apologetic, then Paul, inspired by the same Spirit of God in his writing, is not going to be saying in this passage that we shouldn't be doing that. Okay, that's the first observation. Fair enough so far?
Yep. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Second observation is Paul doesn't say we shouldn't do apologetics. What Paul describes is his manner among the Corinthians.
Mm-hmm.
He said, this is what I did with you, and under this set of circumstances, I acted this way so that your confidence would be in the power of God. All right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the second observation. Now, here's the third thing. Let me ask you a question. And I don't mean it all to embarrass you, put you on a hot spot or anything like this, but this is a description that Paul is making himself of how he engaged the Corinthians. Do we have any record of his communication with the Corinthians that he's making reference to?
Not that. I don't know. That's why.
Well, the answer would be yes, and it's in the book of Acts, and it's Acts chapter 20. I'm sorry, not Acts chapter 20, Acts chapter 18. Because we have the record in Acts of Paul going to Corinth. Chapter 18, beginning in the verse 1. After these things, he left Athens and went to Corinth. And he found a certain Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, having recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla. There's Aquila and Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all the Jews to leave Rome. He came to them, and because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them, and they were working, for they were by trade tent makers. And, verse 4, he was reasoning in the synagogue every Sabbath.
There you go.
And trying to persuade Jews and Greeks. Now, the thing that you didn't do, that you might have, and it didn't occur to you, and that's all right, this is why we talk about these things, is, let's go back to the book of Acts, which recounts a lot of these particular things, and see if we have any record of what he actually did. Well, we do, and we read it in chapter 18, and it says that he reasoned from the Scriptures, and he tried to persuade Jews and Greeks. So he was using a particular kind of apologetics. So then the question becomes, all right, so he doesn't mean in 1 Corinthians 2 that we should not use apologetics. Other texts say we should. He doesn't even say that here. He talks about the way he comported himself, and it turns out that at least in part, with Aquila and Priscilla, he did use apologetics. So what is going on here in chapter 2? Now, the answer to that is it's a different question, what's going on, and I'm not entirely sure how to characterize that. He might be saying, look, with some of you, this is, there were times that he did, and there were times that he didn't, okay? One could argue, well, the Scriptures that he reasoned from, he was using apologetics, but they gave the wisdom of God, and that's the wisdom he's talking about here, that are not of the world, so that you'd have the confidence in the Word of God. Fine. But he still is using apologetics of a particular kind of a sort. So there could be a harmony here between these passages, but what you don't get out of chapter 2 is a clear refutation of the notion of doing apologetics. It's not there, for one, and secondly, doing apologetics is all throughout the New Testament, in the life of Jesus and the apostles, the book of Acts, etc.
Yeah, and I've actually used that as well, saying that Paul argued in the temples and Jesus reasoned with people, and so I knew there was a way to reconcile them. That's why I was calling you for the
sure.
kind of help me.
Yeah, I'm glad you
cover
did.
My blind spot.
And I do think that this one's a little bit tricky because, but what we have to do, and this is what I do a lot of times when I am trying to deal with a passage that is harder. I try to do elimination. Well, it doesn't mean this, it doesn't mean this, it doesn't mean this, and here are good reasons why it can't mean that. So now I've eliminated some options, and that's why I said here, it's not against apologetics because that is commanded in other texts, and he talks about the way he was with the Corinthians, and indeed in Corinth he did reason. So something else is going on here. And this requires us then to look a little closer at the passage to find a reconciliation.
Yeah, and so I guess that's completely satisfying to me in terms of, looking at it from the angle of apologetics.
Mm-hmm.
I guess the question that follows from that is when he says, however we speak, in verse 6 he says we speak wisdom to those who are mature.
Mm-hmm.
What does that leave us with then? Is that advice? It's not a command?
Well, just think of the flow here, and let me just go back a little bit. He says that I was with you in weakness and fear and in much trembling. Incidentally, it says in chapter 18 that Jesus actually appeared to Paul and said to Paul, do not be afraid any longer, but go on speaking and do not be silent. I am with you, and no one will harm you, for I have many people in the city. So Paul then is telling the Corinthians, I was scared when I was there, and that's part of the record in the book of Acts, chapter 18. But he says it was not in persuasive words of wisdom. Now here I think what he's probably referring to is what the Greeks considered wisdom, because he talks about the wisdom of God versus the wisdom of men in the end of chapter 1. And you may want to review that a little bit. So there's a flow here. There's a flow of thought. And he says, I determined to know nothing among you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. That's verse 2 of chapter 2. So he says, I'm bringing a message, and this is a message that to the rank and file, smarty pants Greek philosopher is dumb. But it's not dumb. It's the wisdom of God. And he says in another place, right close here, he says, we want to call it foolish. Well, I'm well pleased. God was well pleased by the foolishness, quote unquote, of the message preached to save those who believe. And here you've got, it's like a repetition of the thought we have in Romans 1. It's the power of God to salvation. You want to call that dumb? All right, call it whatever you want. That can save you. It does the job. And I think that's what he's talking about here. It's demonstration, verse 4, of the Spirit and a power, that your faith would not rest on the wisdom of men, but on the power of God. But we do speak a wisdom among those who are mature. Now, and this is where a wisdom, however, not of this age, nor of the rulers of this age who are passing away, God's wisdom in a mystery, the hidden wisdom. And I think this is partly the wisdom of the gospel. The gospel message is God's wisdom, where he is both just and justifier of those who have faith in Jesus. This isn't something that men thought up. This is something that God has given, and to men this seems silly. Doesn't matter. God has revealed these things, and the person who is clever or mature or astute is going to see that, I think, is his point. He says further on, and you could read the rest of the chapter, there's a verse often taken out of context by people. It says, things which eye has not seen and ear has not heard, which not entered into the heart of man, all that God has prepared for those who love him. And people say, well, look, we don't even know what's out there. Well, the next
read the next verse.
Yeah, exactly. For to us, God has revealed them through the Spirit.
Right.
Now, and then he goes on to kind of say, but you know what? People don't understand it. These are spiritually appraised, and I think this is part of what you have in verse 6. It's a wisdom for those who are mature. He says later in the chapter there, this is spiritually appraised. These guys are reading our mail. It doesn't make sense to them, all right? But the one who has the Spirit of Christ, it makes sense to him. The one whose heart is being turned by God, it falls together. So I think this is a section on, don't be intimidated by people who say that your view is dumb. It isn't dumb. There's a coherence to it and a sensibility to it when you understand it. And if you don't understand it, well, sorry, it's spiritual. It's not meant to be understood by those who are perishing. It's foolishness to those who are perishing. It's not foolishness to us.
Yeah.
All right.
That's good. Yeah, I appreciate the connection back to Acts.
Well, Scott,
that too, so.
Yeah, it's the more you can find out and cross-reference, the easier it's going to be. And I like going to Acts because you get a little bit more insight there.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, cool. I appreciate that. I had another question, and I don't know if there's time for it.
No, I got to move on. Just because I got so many people waiting on board here, Scott. But you can call me again. Call me next week. We'll chat. Okay, if that's the one about teaching Columbo, I'd love to talk to you about that.
It is. Okay, thanks
Great.
so much, Greg.
All right. It's great talking to you, Scott. I appreciate your call. Let me look at the clock. Why don't we go to San Diego and Dave? Hello, Dave. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Greg. How are you?
I'm doing okay.
Good, good.
Thanks.
Like your previous caller just now, I have a question that is not at all intended to be, anything more than kind of a devil's advocate kind of approach. I love the way that you handle same-sex marriage. You're the first person that I ever heard say, "Don't call it gay marriage, call it same-sex marriage," and defend it from that, or fight against it from that point of view.
Right.
Your argument is what that camp is trying to do is redefine the word marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And from a devil's advocate standpoint, I'd like to say, if you personally, as an adoptive father, have had anybody ever come back to you and say, well, you've redefined the word father, which was given to us by God from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm. Well, after a fashion, given one definition of the word, yes, if a father is simply somebody who I want to say donate sperm, but that probably isn't the best way to put it. But is somebody who provides genetic material for procreation? Well, in that sense, I am not the father of my children.
Mm-hmm.
If father it also legitimately means playing a particular kind of role in their lives, well, then I am the father of these children, and the word has that meaning in both directions. So I am not abusing the word father when I use it in that way. And adoption has been, around, at least unofficially, since the beginning of time, presumably.
Sure.
So the whole enterprise. So my response would be, in one sense, yes, in another sense, no. However, as the question then would be, why is that relevant to the question of same-sex marriage? And I think it has to do with redefining. It's okay to redefine. But of course, what same-sex marriage doesn't simply redefine marriage. It is a denial of one institution with a replacement of a different institution. Marriage just is a union between a man and a woman that, as a group, as a rule, and by nature, produces the next generation, which is why the government or the culture has any interest in it. If this wasn't the case, they wouldn't be involved. This is an attempt to take the institution and say it isn't what it always was considered to be. The building block of culture in virtue of producing the next generation. But rather, marriage is just a socially constructed arrangement between people to do what? To hang out? For how long? As long as they want. It's very different. It's not really a redefining if what one means is they're just kind of altering or tweaking it a little bit. It is an abolishment of one thing and raising something else up in its place.
Sure. No, that's a good point.
Yeah. So there have been variations on the theme of marriage, but just because there's been variations in the past doesn't mean that there hasn't been a theme.
Sure.
So what is it that has, in the midst of all of these variations, whether it's polygamy or monogamy or serial polygamy like divorce and remarriage or any of all the variations we've seen in the past, there has always been one common thread that seems to be central. And that common thread is male plus female. Maybe one male and multiple females, maybe multiple males and one female, whatever, But it's the common thread in the midst of all the variations, the general theme, if you will, has been a male and female. Now, historically, some have been denied marriage, like the young or the genetically aberrant, or in rare cases, interracial couples, like we were talking about last hour. But and some were also allowed to marry more than once, divorce, remarriage, polygamy. But and spousal rights and marital traditions have changed. But since the dawn of civilization, marriage has always been between males and females, because of the unique function they perform in society. I think it was one of the Supreme Court justices said last year when they were discussing this whole issue. He said, same-sex marriages is as a concept is not even as old as the cell phone. So maybe we should go a little more slowly in reformatting culture around this new idea, this newfangled idea. And so I think I'm safe in saying that the thing that has always been the same in marriage is male plus female. And if you want to redefine marriage as male and male and female, then you're not redefining it. You're abolishing that one thing that was always consistent, and you are instituting something entirely new in its place.
Sure.
All right.
Well, thank you very much. I try to take your approach of kind of drawing out these conversations in my head and have the what if scenarios. And that popped up, and I couldn't come up with a good solution for it. So thank you, Ray.
Yeah, I'm glad to have had this conversation with you, Dave.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you so much. By the way, the reflections I was offering just at the end actually came from the Same-Sex Marriage Quick Reference Guide. This is available at str.org. Same-sex marriage, that would be hyphenated same-sex if you're doing a search. Same-Sex Marriage Quick Reference Guide, and quick reference is also properly hyphenated. But there, it's just a little card. It's like it's not even 8 by 10. It's smaller than that. But and it's embossed or plasticized or whatever you call it. But it's got the basic challenges and my basic argument all in just one little thing. And I was making reference to it in the conversation there. Given the challenge, marriage is constantly being redefined. I don't think that's true. All right, let's go to break, and I will return. You're listening to Stand to Reason.
You can find STR on Facebook, Twitter, Google+, and Pinterest. Interact with STR staff, post comments, get involved with other like-minded Christians. Want to know what is going on with STR? Speaking events, new podcasts, resources, and articles? Follow STR online. You can find all of our social media connections at str.org.
Show Stand to Reason, ladies and gentlemen. I'm your host, Greg Koukl, with you every week for 3 hours. Live show on Tuesday nights from 4 until 7. That's the time to call in Los Angeles time. If you'd like to chat with me, and there are many people online right now that have done that, 855-243-9975 is the number. If you're outside the U.S., you can just dial us local. That is 1-562-424-8229 is the best way to do that. Let's see who we got here. In British Columbia, Laura. Hello, Laura.
Hi. Sorry.
Hi.
My question was about worldviews. Specifically, like most of the apologetic material I see is written specifically to atheist worldviews. And I'm wondering how to approach people who haven't really thought about their worldview.
It's interesting you mention this because it's not entirely true that most has been written for an atheistic worldview, but a lot of it has been because of the visibility of atheists, particularly the new atheists in the last 10 or 12 years. I have in front of me a little book that came in the mail. I guess Crossway sent it to us. And we get books like that from time to time. Crossway, a great publisher, lots of good work there. This book is written by James Anderson, and it's called What's Your Worldview? Although I noticed that there's no possessive here in the what's. And there should be, so there's a typo on the cover, but I'm not gonna fuss about that. All right, of course I already have. See on the binding on the edge it has apostrophe, but not on the cover. Maybe they're just trying to be postmodern. I don't know. What's your worldview? And it's an interactive approach to life's big questions. I have enjoyed this immensely. It's only a little bit more than 100, actually without the notes, 103 pages. And each of the chapters is 1 to 2 pages long, like one leaf. That's it. So it is meant to be an interactive worldview analysis guide. So it starts out by asking basic questions like, Do you have the power to make free choices? Is there any objective truth? Is it possible to know the truth? Is anything objectively good or bad? And so it starts with these questions. Now, it's not arguing at this point for any particular view. It's just simply saying that there are consequences to your commitments to these questions, the answers you give to these questions, that take you in certain directions, whether you like it or not. They're logical entailments. They lead places. For example, the very first question, and it's just one page. It's just 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs. The freedom question: do you have the power to make free choices? And it talks a little bit about that and asks the question: do you have the power to make free choices? If you answered no to the freedom question, go to page 20. So you flip the page, and then it pokes fun a little bit. Forgive me, I couldn't resist the joke, but did you not choose to turn the page and go to page 20, So apparently you do believe in freedom. And then there's the truth question. Is there any objective truth? And he talks about what that is, another 4 paragraphs. And then he says, if you answer yes to the truth question, then go to page 22. That's the knowledge question. If no, then go to page 91. Oh, okay, so no, I don't believe there's any truth. Okay, wait. Well, then jump ahead to the end of the book.
Okay.
Okay, then he says, well, now you have a worldview. It's called relativism. You don't believe there's any objective truth. You're a relativist. Okay, great. Well, there are different kinds of relativists, blah, 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 blah. But now you got a problem. The problem is, if you say there is no truth, I can ask you the question, is that true? That sounds like it's self-defeating. And the other problem is it flies in the face of our most basic intuitions. It seems like we do know some truths, all right? But if you want to cling to that, you're done. You're done with the book. You've reached the end of the trail. Stop. That's it. It's over with. If you want to go back and reconsider the truth question, go back to 21 and move from there. So you can see what the person is doing here, James Anderson. He is forcing people to think in terms of what their worldviews are, and the path of one's worldview is dictated by how they answer some very basic questions. The truth question, the knowledge question. Some people might say there is truth, but you can't know it. Oh, okay, well, then that's going to lead you somewhere. What about good and evil? Do those exist objectively? Is there more than one valid religion? Is there a God? These are all the questions. Is everything ultimately material in the universe, or is everything ultimately spirit? So he begins to ask these questions, and you check off yes or no based on the short, relatively brief, certainly manageable, but I think adequate for the task, analyses regarding the question. So you read through it, and then you answer it, and you find out where you land. I think this is fabulous for 2 reasons. In fact, I had it in front of me because I wanted to promo it a little bit. At the beginning of next hour, I won't have to do that. I can do something else. I think it's fabulous for 2 reasons, Laura. What's Your Worldview by James Anderson.
Okay.
For one reason is it allows people to think coherently about their own view. That is, well, I'm a relativist, okay, and where does that lead? Well, I think there's, it's no right or wrong, whatever. Where does that lead? Let's just follow that out. Here's where you land. Okay, you're at a dead end now. You happy with that? Wow, no? Okay, well, then you got to go back and make some changes, because this is where your map leads, inevitably. So it gets people actually thinking about their worldview, but it also gives the Christian not only that feature, that is the way that worldviews are, a worldview has internal coherence dependent on how you answer certain questions, but it also gives the Christian a little bit of a snapshot of a number of different worldviews. So you can see what other narratives are out there, other worldview stories are available. So go ahead.
Yeah, that sounds really helpful.
Yeah, I highly recommend it so far. I've read about half of it, and I was just sitting in an airport waiting for a plane when I read most of it. And I kept underlining and then jumping all around and saying, what does this say? Here's one. Finite Godism. What's that? Well, I know what it is, but I wanted to see what they had to say about it. Here's worldview materialism. So he starts with questions. Let me see how he breaks it down. He starts with questions, And then he ends with next section are categories like atheist worldviews, theist worldviews, etc. And then he looks at specific worldviews. This is final resting place or places for people. And then there's a whole host of them: deism, Christianity, atheistic dualism, atheistic idealism, panentheism, polytheism, Pelagianism, relativism, on and on, Unitarianism. So these are all categories that are good to know about. I recommend it for people because it'll help you then to question other people, and you can question them with the ultimate questions that are offered as the first opening chapters of the book. And then if you're a little bit familiar with how this works, you can tutor people with where this is going to ultimately lead them. And this is really what I call the taking the roof off strategy, or a tactic that's being used here. It's very good.
Okay.
Does that help?
It does, yeah.
Okay.
I was specifically like if you personally have found value in helping people define their worldview.
Yes, I think what it does is it organizes things. I wouldn't say that in every circumstance I'm like, okay, let me see if I get your worldview correct here. But I am trying to get people to think about the consequences of what they say they believe. So if they're going to be moral relativists, and I talk about this Sunday at a church, I said, look, if somebody's going to be a moral relativist, like there's no ultimate right or wrong, so don't get your judgments off of my body kind of thing. Fine, okay, well, you're welcome to that, but you can't help yourself to the problem of evil.
Right.
Because the problem of evil depends on there being real evil in the world, not just your relativistic version. So what's it going to be? And so I use this general method a lot. I want people to see the consequences of their worldview, but I don't always do like the worldview primer.
Right.
It's just a matter of style and opportunity, really. All right?
Okay.
I just got some information from the enforcer that apparently this What's Your Worldview book is going to be a featured resource on sale on Thursday at str.org. Is that right? Yeah. So, just hold off for 2 more days and go to str.org and you can get it at a discount. What do you think?
That sounds great.
Okay. Thank you, Laura.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, I appreciate your call. I picked this book up about a week ago and was just thrilled to see it. Sometimes you see these books come in and you're not sure, okay, what next here? And some stuff isn't that good. Crossway is a good cover, though. They're a good publisher. And in fact, we had Justin Taylor on, was it last week or the week before last, talking about his book on Jesus and the last week of Christ. Justin is one of the editors there at Crossway. And when I started paging through the book, immediately I liked what I saw, so I grabbed it. I said, this one's my copy, isn't it, Melinda? So I confiscated it and took it with me on my next trip and read, like I said, a good bit of it there in the airport, and then I could see its value. I'm looking forward to using this to recommend to people as part of a larger way of training their families. They're Christians, not just adults, but younger people. My daughter's 9. I think this is too complex for her, but there'll be a time when we can start introducing some of these ideas to her. What I want my kids to see, and those that I come in contact with as I promote the Christian worldview, is I want them to see that worldviews are packages. The way I've characteristically put it is worldviews are like puzzles, and they're pictures of reality that are made out of pieces. One piece, your view about knowledge, your view about God, your view about other religions, your view about morality. All of these are pieces, and sometimes people have pieces in their worldview puzzle box that don't actually fit together. They don't go together. They don't match. They're in their box because they like the pieces, but they don't actually fit together. And once you force a person to begin to try to put their worldview puzzles together, then maybe they become aware of the incoherence of their own view. This doesn't fit. So you're asking me, why does God allow evil in the world? And maybe there's no God because there's so much evil, but you're a relativist. Okay, those are picture pieces from different puzzles. So this, I think, is a very helpful metaphor. They're from different puzzles. they aren't going to fit. As I've said, to describe reincarnation and Christianity, which also don't fit, it's kind of like putting a carburetor on a computer. It doesn't do any work. And the minute you say that morals are relative, you have forfeited the legitimate complaint against God based on the problem of evil. That is, if what you think you're doing is complaining about God because, on your view, there seems to be evil in the world. Now, there is an end around here where you could say, well, look, I don't believe in morality. I'm a relativist, but you do. And in the Christian worldview, there is an internal contradiction because you believe in a good and powerful God, but you also believe in evil, which I don't, but you do. So therefore, how do you resolve the internal contradiction? But I will tell you a secret. There is almost no one I've ever talked to that put the problem to me that way. It's a more sophisticated way of doing it. It does avoid the complication that I just pointed out. But most people, when they complain about the problem of evil, are saying, look at that evil in the world. If you really believe in God and there is a good and powerful God, how did he allow that evil thing? So they're identifying genuine evil in the world, yet maybe a few moments later or before, they are proclaiming moral relativism, keep your laws off my body kind of thing, because it's just to make me up. Morality is up to the individual. Well, all right, great. Well, then it's one or the other. You can't have it both ways if you're going to be intellectually honest. So this is, I think, the value of a book like James Anderson's What's Your Worldview? That it gives you it gives you the tools to help a person see that there are consequences to their worldview. Ideas have consequences. And if you hold to one thing firmly, then that sets you on a particular trajectory that leads somewhere else inexorably. And if the place that it leads is not very appealing to you, or it assaults your common sense or your basic intuitions about reality, then you're going to have to rethink where you started from. You got off on the wrong foot. Something's amiss in your worldview. And I think that's the big advantage of a book like this. It really is consistent with the way that I try to approach these broader issues. And one of the reasons that I think ultimately Christianity is so powerful, because it has explanatory power and it's internally coherent. All right? Okay, end of this segment and this hour, 1 hour ahead of us. Greg Koukl, Stand to Reason.